The Silent Watcher. In a small, forgotten town stood an abandoned hospital known as Black Hollow Asylum. Decades ago, it had been a place for the mentally ill, but stories of abuse and mysterious deaths had led to its closure. Locals whispered about shadowy figures seen in the windows at night and chilling screams that echoed from its empty halls. Few dared to approach it, but one man decided to investigate. Eric, a skeptic who didn't believe in ghosts. Eric was a freelance photographer, always chasing his next big story. He thought the asylum would make for a perfect photo series. Armed with a camera, flashlight, and recorder, he entered the building on a cold, moonless night. The air inside was thick and damp, carrying the faint scent of decay. The walls were covered in peeling paint, and the floors were littered with broken furniture and medical equipment. Eric clicked on his recorder. Black Hollow Asylum, midnight. "Let's see if these ghost stories are real," he said, his voice steady. As he walked through the halls, his flashlight flickered. He stopped, tapping it, and the beam stabilized. But just as it did, he noticed something in the corner of his eye, a shadow darting across the hallway. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing. There was no response. Eric shrugged it off and continued exploring, snapping pictures of the eerie surroundings. But as he reviewed the photos on his camera, he froze. In one of the shots, there was a figure standing at the end of the hallway, a pale woman in a hospital gown, her head tilted unnaturally to the side. Eric spun around, his flashlight sweeping the corridor. It was empty. "Must have been a trick of the light," he muttered, though his hands trembled. He ventured deeper into the asylum, reaching the old operating theater. The room was large and circular, with rows of rusted seats overlooking the central operating table. As he stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind him. Eric's heart raced. He turned to the door, pulling on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Then he heard it. A faint humming, soft at first, but growing louder. It was a woman's voice singing a haunting lullaby. The sound echoed through the room, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Who's there?" Eric shouted, his voice cracking. The humming stopped. In the silence that followed, a cold hand brushed against his neck. He spun around, but no one was there. His flashlight began to flicker again, plunging the room into darkness. And then he saw her. She stood at the edge of the operating table, her face obscured by long, matted hair. Her gown was stained with blood, and her head still hung at that unnatural angle. Slowly, she lifted her hand, pointing at him. "Why did you come here?" she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with malice. Eric backed away, his breath coming in short gasps. He raised his camera instinctively, snapping a photo. The flash illuminated her face, pale, hollow eyes, and a twisted smile that stretched too wide. The camera slipped from his hands as the woman lunged toward him. The room filled with her piercing scream, a sound so chilling it seemed to cut through his very soul. Eric bolted for the door, slamming his shoulder into it until it finally gave way. He ran through the halls, the sound of bare feet slapping against the floor close behind him. When he finally burst out into the cold night air, he collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. He looked back at the asylum, but it was dark and silent, as if nothing had happened. Eric never spoke of what he saw that night. But when he developed the photos, the last one sent him into a spiral of terror. It wasn't just the woman's face in the flash, it was dozens of them. Shadowy figures filled the room, all staring at the camera with hollow, accusing eyes. Eric left town the next day, abandoning his career. Black Hollow Asylum remains untouched, its doors sealed, but the locals say the woman still watches from the windows, waiting for her next visitor.